Okay, we're going to alternate questions. The first question is going to go to Bob Seidensticker. All right, this question is directed to Bob Seidensticker. Why do most cultures seek God if God did not put this desire in their being?
There's a concept within biology called the hyperactive agency detector. And the idea is that if you are a primitive person, a caveman kind of person, you hear a rustling in the bushes, it could be a tiger or it could be nothing. Now if you are timid and you assign agency to that, it's not the wind, I think it's a tiger, you might live to see another day. If you say, oh, whatever, I mean, the last 10 times it's been the wind, I'm just going to assume it's the same thing, you might get eaten, you might become lunch. So the idea is that we are programmed incorrectly. I mean, it's sort of a balance. I mean, how much agency do you see? I mean, sometimes when you hear a creaking door, someone's opening a door, and other times it's the wind, and other times it's your imagination. So I think if you look at evolution, you can find reasons for things like this, even though, in fact, God doesn't exist.
Well, I made the point that I believe that we have a tendency and intuition to believe in God, and I think we see that all around us, all over the world, in every culture, in every background, in remote tribes, in civilized worlds, in Western worlds. Everybody has a natural tendency to believe in God, and actually I noticed that we have to spend a lot of work in public schools and some other places to get it out of our system. So I strongly believe it's true that we have a tendency to believe in God.
All right, thank you. Rob, this question is addressed to you. You seem to think most people believe in God all over the world. It sounds like you believe in the Muslim God, Allah too. Are all gods real, or just Jesus and the God of the Bible?
Well, I believe we all have the intuition to believe in God, but we also then have the duty to find out what the correct God is. And obviously this is where flaws come in by the human race, that we start making up things and having wrong interpretations. We have the duty, and everybody has to do their own research on that, to check out that the God we choose to believe in and the Holy Scriptures we choose to believe in are actually true. And not just because of where we live, but just because of the truth of the Scriptures and the truth of the things we want to believe. So we have to do our own research. We start out with believing in God, for which we have also evidences, and then the next step we need to do is do the research and try to find out which is the correct faith. So that's the job that everybody has to do for themselves.
Right, and a response?
I agree that we need to do research, so that's a great point that Rob makes. You might have an intuition, a feeling, what's it founded on? Investigate the beliefs, and as Rob noted, don't just say, oh, well, the options are Christianity and atheism, because I'm in America. What else would they be? If you were in other countries, it would be different. Do the research. I agree with that. Thank you, Rob.
And addressed to Bob. Matter exists. What was its cause?
The short answer is that science doesn't know. If the question is what caused the Big Bang, or what happened before the Big Bang, or where did all this stuff come from, short answer, science doesn't know. And science says that unashamedly, and that is where new science comes from. I'm talking to you on a microphone powered with electricity, and we have computers in our pockets. Science delivers. It's not always correct, but it does a pretty good job. So I look to science to tell us truths about reality, truths about nature.
And I agree on that. You have to look at science to find truths, but you also have to be realistic. And at some point you have to look at the evidences you have, which are based on data that you've gathered, and then conclude that there's no explanation for it in science. And then you just have to accept that it was God. At some point what I see happening is as we get more information, like on the origin of the universe or the DNA in the first living cell, there is no scientific explanation how hard we research for it. And then you have to keep having faith that science will find the solution. It only turns into a faith and not a science. So if Bob says that, science will find the solution, I consider that a statement of faith and not a statement that science might actually lead there.
Thank you again, both of you. All right, this is addressed to Rob, and I'm going to struggle through this question just a little, so follow it as best you can, and I'll read it as best I can. I think it's a good question. Maybe the two guys that really know what it's asking are behind the table, I'm not sure, but let's try it. So Rob, you said about the fine-tuning argument that aside from the multiverse theory, you must conclude there is a designer. But given infinite time and the possibility of a multiverse, any probability argument, no matter how small the number, fails to necessitate a designer. Can you address this?
Well, it's a little almost similar like about faith and science again here. We have to realize, first of all, that we do not have any evidence whatsoever for a multiverse. There is nobody who's ever observed anything that there might be other universes out there, let alone a whole ensemble of universes, or many, many, many millions or billions or trillions or even close to infinite ones. So it is a pure statement of faith whether you want to believe in the multiverse or not. Then theoretically, you have to look at all the probabilities. The probabilities are so small that they reach the infinite level as well. There's basically no chance to find another universe where life is possible. So if you have no chance, if there's an infinite chance of finding another universe, comparing that to an infinite number of universes, at some point you might find life there somewhere. But again, you would have to have so much faith that these infinite number of universes exist that it becomes, to me, not scientific anymore.
We have never seen an atom. We know they exist. We have experiments which show they exist. We've never seen an atom. We don't have direct evidence of the multiverse, and yet that is a consequence. The multiverse hypothesis is a consequence, again, of very well-established science. It may turn out that in the future we decide that that's poorly evidenced, but we can't say that we're just accepting the multiverse idea on faith. If I could just go back to one other thing, just to clarify my own position, I don't say science will answer the question. Science may not. Science has done a pretty good job so far, that's all I'm saying. I trust science, I don't have faith in it.
I have a question. Help me understand the difference between trust and faith.
Yeah, great question. I see that, unfortunately, I think deliberately often confused. From my standpoint, trust is belief well-grounded on evidence. And what I prefer to do, I think, is just ignore the word faith. If we understand that, that's the word that has value for me. I have no use for anything else. I could try to argue, to say what I think faith is. You might say that's not what I think it is. Doesn't much matter. If you know what I mean by trust, that is belief well supported by evidence. That's what I have. That's what I have in science. Maybe it's sometimes wrong. It does a pretty good job. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you. Wow. Interesting question. What is to gain from holding atheistic position?
This is a little bit like Pascal's wager, but the quick answer to the question is I have my self-worth, my integrity to gain. I have no use for a pretty hypothesis, one that's nice, one will be attractive. I care about what's true. I am going to do a clumsy, inept job, because I'm an imperfect person, finding that truth, but that's my goal. I want the truth. If there is no God, that's what I want to know. If there is a God, I want to know that too. I'm happy to go where the evidence leads.
I totally agree with what Bob just said. I like to go too where the evidence leads. It's actually really interesting that we are both having a very, very similar background, and we reach totally different conclusions. So apparently, we either look at different evidence or we just draw different conclusions. But I agree with what Bob said, that I like to go where the evidence leads.
All right, this next question might have a contradiction in terms. Rob, can you believe in God without faith in a purely scientific manner?
Well, Bob defined it just very nicely. For me, faith is based on evidences. I cannot, with 100% certainty, prove to you or to myself that God exists. I'll have to wait till I die, I guess, to know that out for sure. But based on the evidence I see, it gives me a very grounded decision, a logical decision, a reasonable decision, that for me the evidences point very clearly that God exists. And then I'd have to take a little step of faith to make the final conclusion that I go for that.
Right, do you want to comment on that? Okay, we'll go to the next question. Bob, didn't Christianity start as an adult religion?
It did, and let me just strengthen that challenge to me. What about China? What about Russia post-fall of the Berlin Wall? Do we not see millions of adults in China going to Christianity? And that certainly is true. When I gave the thought experiment of the adults-only Christianity, I'm thinking about the West. In the West, if you say, hey, have you heard the good news? Who's going to say no? I mean, everyone knows about Christianity and Jesus. It's already there. That's a very different situation we find in China or Russia or the early days of the Christian church. So if the point is adults can convert to Christianity, of course they can. That certainly is true. There was a recent study, maybe about a year ago, a Pew study, very thorough. It was an international study of the change in religions, and it noted that Christianity and Islam are growing right now because of babies. There new Christian babies, new Muslim babies are being formed, largely in Africa and Asia. That's not going to last much longer. But the other thing that it looked at was conversion. Why are there new Christians? 1, babies. 2, conversions. How do these two, what's the magnitude of these two? And it's about 100 to 1 was their estimate. That is, certainly people do migrate in. A Muslim could turn into a Christian or whatever. All these things are possible. But it's quite rare compared to simply new children being born.
I think adults becoming Christians, Bob referred to that as the very early Christians, I think is a very powerful evidence actually for the truth of Christianity. You have to realize that the very first Christians were actually Jews who didn't really believe in a kind of resurrection as part of their faith. They met the resurrected Jesus, and they made very big decisions to dramatically change their lives and even dropped everything they were doing and proclaiming the gospel, and that's why we have Christianity in the first place. So the very first conversions are actually very, very powerful, and they all deal with adults making very difficult choices to follow Christ.
Okay, this question's addressed to you, Rob. Thank you. Rob, in light of your early skepticism, how did you come to believe the Bible to be reliable and trustworthy? What makes the Bible credible for you?
That's a short answer with a short question with a very long answer, if I would go there. But let me just say that the basic basis there is historical reliability. I trust the Bible because if I read the Bible accounts, I can verify them in history. They fit into the history. There is a lot of data in the Bible and a lot of details in the Bible. They cover a long period of time. It mentions very, very many names. It talks about tribes, it talks about customs, it talks about wars, it talks about all kind of people and all kind of situation. It talks about, for instance, prices of slaves at particular times in history. And we can verify just about all these things through archaeology and through other historical sources, and again confirm that they line up correctly. The other thing that really resonates for me for the New Testament part is the 4 Gospels that we have, which are the only Gospels that can be dated back to the early times. The interesting thing there is that if you read those Gospels as eyewitness accounts, and you apply criteria, which you could apply as well to, a court case these days where you get multiple eyewitness testimony, you can see that the criteria for those kind of testimonies apply exactly to the 4 Gospels in the Bible. They all basically talk about the main storyline, but they differ in details. They differ in even mentioning insignificant details to the accounts. And there is a whole bunch of other criteria you can apply that they just map up very, very honestly. So they're showing that these 4 Gospels are not perfect, but they are honest, and that's very powerful to me.
Let me just reiterate the skeptical principle that I encouraged on you in my closing remarks. That is there are a number of one-sentence summaries of principles within Christianity that encourage you to check. The disciples died as martyrs. How do we know that? We know that from an early 3rd century document. There's a huge amount of time between the events they claim to report and the documentation. How do we know that Mark wrote Mark? All these fundamental ideas, investigate them. If you want an easy way to do it, you can see what I've done and go to my blog and look up some of these things. Or not, do it on your own. The thing that I continue to find is these things that are sort of casually tossed up. Oh, everyone knows that blank. Behind it is nothing. So don't take my word for it. Check it out. That would be what I would encourage on you.
All right. Thank you for those comments. Bob, another one about morality. If morality is innate, is it subject to cultural or evolutionary change?
I mean, you can think about the morality that we find in the Bible. God commanded genocide. God regulated slavery. One other thing that's often casually tossed out is the idea that slavery in the Old Testament is very different from American slavery. In fact, it's not. So morality over time changes. Right now, slavery is abhorrent to us. Genocide as well. Slavery changes over time. Morality, the ideas of morality change over time. They are culturally specific. You have things like honor that would be very culturally specific. You have things like the golden rule that would be much more tightly held, much more common among different societies. When you look at what evolution says we're social animals. So things like savagery can have a benefit, anger, rage, that sort of thing, as well as cooperation, sympathy, empathy, these kinds of things. We're social animals, and it's a fairly confusing mix of traits that evolution has given us, and that's where morality comes from.
If I think about atheism, I have a real problem with the whole concept of morality even existing. If a true atheist believes that God doesn't exist, then he believes that there is no responsibility, no accountability, no afterlife, no nothing, and the only thing you do is try to optimize and get the most things out of your current life because that's all there is. In that context, I just cannot understand why an atheist would bother with anything like morality. Why would you care about anybody else? Why would you care about helping somebody? Why would you just not let natural selection run its course and kill off the weak and the people that are burden on the society and just get the most out of it for yourself? If you're a true atheist, that's what you should do. But nobody does that. And I'm glad they don't, by the way, but nobody does that because they do believe in objective moral values. They do that because they just feel that is the wrong thing to do. But if you're true to atheism, then you would not believe in moral values and you would live a totally different life than what anybody can see happening around us.
All right. Rob, your arguments depend too much on an absolute good and bad or evil, which is practically rejected in favor of a more realistic view of a relative good and bad. I read this question and now I realize there's no question. I apologize. I think we're going to pass on that one. There's no question mark at all. So we'll pass on that one. I'm going to shoot a different one at you, okay? If the world needed a designer, wouldn't that designer need a creator, and that creator need one, and so on and so on?
Well, that would only be the case if the designer or the creator, which are the same person, would have to be created himself. But my point is that the designer, the creator, God, himself is uncaused. He is eternal. He doesn't need to be created. He always is, and he always was, and he always will be. So he is an uncaused being, therefore he doesn't need a cause. He doesn't need anybody to create him. He always was, and out of that state, he created the universe.
As a theological statement, the idea that the claim that God is uncaused is fine, but it's not going to convince us of anything. It's just simply, in my religion, we believe that. It's fine, believe whatever you want to, give me whatever list you want to, but if I'm going to believe that God is uncaused, I'm going to need some evidence.
And I just want to ask a point of clarification on that one, Bob.
Yep.
And that is, if I conclude that there's not evidence that God, that reasonable evidence that God exists, who then is the ultimate determiner of truth?
If you look up truth, morality, meaning in the dictionary, there's nothing objective in there. I mean, we understand what objective means. It's added as a qualifier because it's not in the word itself. Meaning, morality, those kinds of things, they are just relative. Now, Rob was concerned about atheists getting away with it, and of course he's uncovered our secret because the last time I murdered somebody, I just told the cop officer, I'm an atheist. He said, okay, no problem, sir. You can just go on your way. Turns out, and who would have guessed, there actually are consequences. I am beholden to other people, society, my family. We act very similarly. So, I mean, obviously, we have shared moral values. Does that cover the question?
So, who determines which moral values?
The buck stops here. I mean, when I have a moral decision, I have to decide. I mean, I can ask you as a friend. Could you help me out with this thing? But eventually, I've got to decide. I mean, you're an adult. You understand how that works. So a Christian will say, but I go to a higher authority. Well, you can certainly imagine that. That's great. You can pray and imagine you get an answer. That's great. From my standpoint, the buck still stops with you. You have to decide for you, which I suppose makes it relative, what is right, what is wrong, what you're going to do in any situation.
So the ultimate determiner is me, myself, which would be relative, yes.
I mean, if you can
okay.
If that seems bizarre, then let me know. But I mean, it seems obvious to me that you've got a fork in the road. Who's going to decide? I mean, if you were a child, then you would get that input from your parents. You can certainly ask for input, but as an adult, fully functioning, you decide.
Okay, I'm going to shoot another question at you here.
Please.
Would you agree that one's interpretation of evidence is squarely based on what a person is willing to believe to begin with? And I see here the question about pre-theoretics or pre-theoretical commitment.
I suppose what we're saying is, does your worldview color how you interpret things? Perhaps that's the idea. I mean, if the point is that we all come with biases, that's true. I do my best to minimize them. What I see as a trend lately is people saying, "Oh, we all have biases, so it's okay if I have mine." And I really reject that idea. I think that we really need to do our best to see both sides of the issue, to avoid, a Christian-only worldview, an anti-Christian worldview, that sort of thing.
I think there can be no doubt that we have all, as a human, tendency to just only look at things that are lining up with the things we already believe. There can be no doubt about it. But I also believe that it is everybody's own duty to go beyond that, go over that tendency, and be willing to look on all sides of the evidences. And frankly, that's what I did. I mean, I was convinced that evolution explained everything and God was not necessary. And I was convinced by the evidence. So it is possible to change your mind.
Thank you. Another question for you, Rob. Could biological evolution, or even its theoretical possibility, be further proof of cosmic fine-tuning?
Biological evolution be evidence for cosmic fine-tuning. Well, you could argue, of course, that God has designed the parts of the evolutionary process, like natural selection, and because it follows logically out of natural law. So yeah, you could argue that. I believe that they are different things. I do believe that probably the fine-tuning points even more to things that cannot follow from natural laws, and they have to be found from another explanation, and that's where you find the designer or God. In the biological sense, perhaps I should like to expand that for a moment as the topic is on the table. And Bob mentioned that about abiogenesis, the beginning of life, and this is really where there is a huge scientific mystery there, where the first life came from. And I only touched on that a little bit. I was only talking about the information in the first DNA. There's an incredible complexity in the first living cell. And that complexity is, I would safely say, beyond anybody's comprehension here in this room. It is incredibly complex. And where that all comes from, and all at the same time, sure, you can have faith or have just, have trust that science will find some solution, but this is not a scientific problem any longer. We do know all the rules. We understand biology. We learn a lot about, the genome, about genetics, about molecular biology, and we just notice that there is no natural process that can do all these things. And that's where the problem is. And that's why I think it's an extremely powerful evidence for the existence of God.
I think it's premature to say that biology has rejected abiogenesis. In fact, they haven't. It's still an open question, and I think if you look at the consensus within biology, they are optimistic that they will get more and more answers, a stronger and stronger idea where abiogenesis comes from. There has never been a situation where we have a question and we finally discover after a millennium, this question we've puzzled every single way has no natural answer. We've decided that for nothing, and that certainly is true for abiogenesis.
So if I may say, that sounds a little like faith, hope, and love, and you're on hope there.
No, I mean it's just a fact that there is no scientific question that scientists have puzzled over again and again and again for centuries and centuries, and finally concluded, agreeing among themselves, this question is not only we don't have an answer yet, we will never have an answer. There is no question for which science says that. Now, of course, a millennium from now they might. A year from now they might. But it's just not the case that we have scientific questions for which science has concluded, ain't going to happen. I mean, individual people might. Individual people might say, based on my experience as a biologist, I see this question never having an answer. Could be, but that's not the consensus. I mean, it's definitely premature to say that abiogenesis will never be an accepted, explained theory within biology.
So then, is it fair to say that your faith position is human cognition is the final arbitrator of truth?
I don't like the F word. I mean, the word faith really just doesn't apply to me. I mean trust is what I have. But you're saying the human is the arbiter for what again? For truth? You're saying?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, this again is a buck stops here thing. Now, when we say it is true that X, that's an approximation. It's always an approximation. Science never says anything with certainty. It's always provisional. You take the most well-established thing, germ theory, for example, that germs cause some diseases, could be overturned. Not likely. Same issue for evolution. Could be overturned, not likely, and so on.
All right. And here's a question now addressed to you, another question. If God existed, what would you have against him?
Nothing. I mean, well, I'm sorry. Maybe I do have something against God. If we're talking about Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, I've read some, pretty shocking parts of the Old Testament, as many of you have as well. God commanding genocide, God regulating slavery, things that, again, from our perspective, I mean, this is just our perspective. One perspective is that slavery is A-OK, and the same is true for genocide, and so on and so on. From my perspective, that's not the case. Who am I? It's just me. But again, the buck stops here. I've got to do my best, and from my standpoint, anybody, God or anything else, that says that genocide is okay, and slavery and rape and all the kind of crazy, unpleasant stuff you've got in the Old Testament, that is not a moral person. Now, if you want to say, of course, a common response is, well, God has his own rules. I mean, how many sets of morality are there? I mean, is it okay to kill things arbitrarily or not? I mean, if God on a whim wants to let Satan kill Job's children just to settle a bet, not cool. Sorry. Now, again, that's just me. That's just me saying that. That's all I've got. Ain't much, but that's all I've got.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Well, first of all, the Yahweh of the Old Testament is the same Yahweh of the New Testament. And you brought up now a few times about genocide has been mentioned, and in a way I don't want to go there, but I'd like to say something about it, is that we have to realize, first of all, that all life belongs to God. So whatever he does with it, who are we to question it? I mean, that's a strong belief that I have. Secondly, God doesn't just wipe people out. He doesn't just say genocide for no reason. Bob is referring to that when the Israelites entered the Promised Land, they killed the Canaanites. But we have to realize that there was a reason for that. The reason was that these people were living a lifestyle which was very evil according to God's moral law. And God actually gave them quite a few opportunities to change there. He didn't just say kill them all. Right already in the time of Abraham, 400 years before the Israelites invaded the Promised Land, he already was working on them, trying to change their lifestyle. There are various references to that in the Bible. You also have to realize that, for instance, the Greek historian Plutarch describes how these people would live. They would sacrifice their children to Molech, who held out his arms over a burning pit. And whether the babies were slaughtered before they were burned is unclear, but Plutarch describes there how they would play the drums just loud enough so that the parents wouldn't hear their children screaming. These people were truly living evil lives. And this is an interesting question, and this is almost, you have to think about it. This is something that atheists often say. When God allows evil societies to thrive, like the Nazis, then atheists will say, like, where's God? Why didn't he intervene? Why didn't he kill Hitler? Why didn't he wipe them out? Why would he have to fight a second world war? So they complain about it. But on the other hand, like in the Old Testament, when God commands to kill evil societies, then they don't like that either. So what do you want?
I've little change of plan. I'll just respond really quickly to that. The idea of genocide for the Canaanites, and again, we, from our standpoint, genocide for any reason is inappropriate. We're talking about God here. Now, here the bizarre thing here is you're looking at an atheist telling a Christian how God works. God can do anything he wants. God could have made the women sterile 50 years earlier, so they just die out. They're just gone. The idea of they are very bad because they kill, they don't kill all the babies because they would die out themselves, but they kill a few babies. Terrible thing, granted. So I know what we should do. Let's kill them all, including all the babies. What sense does that make? God could teleport them to another planet. He could put them on give them an island. He could put a wall around them so they don't bother the Israelites or contaminate them or something. There's just a myriad of clever ways that you can do things if you are omnipotent. That's what God would have done. And what we see in the Old Testament instead is God's palette of options is the same as the Iron Age people who wrote about him, which looks to me like they just imagined themselves doing this and it's all just made up.
Thank you.
I'd like to respond real briefly. Is that what I hear Bob say is he doesn't agree with what God does. He doesn't like what he does, and therefore he thinks God does the wrong thing. And that's what I hear him say again and again. It's not to us to judge God, and it's not fair to say like, oh, I don't agree here with what God does because this is not what I would have done. We really have to look into this thing and say like, God is sovereign, God can make these decisions, and God will do what God does, whether we like it or not.
And perhaps it's also important to go back to our topic tonight, which is it reasonable to believe in God? At this point, we've gone a little bit astray there. I have a final question, and Bob got the first question. Rob, you're going to get the last one, and then Bob will get the last chance to respond. How can moral law exist in a world where acts of evil can be supported or encouraged by those who genuinely believe themselves to be good? And I might throw in there Hitler, Stalin. I think Stalin really believed he was good.
So what you're saying is, how can people believe things while they think they were good? Well, the objective moral law, the idea of objective moral law is that it doesn't change, and it's irrespective of whether people behave accordingly or not. So yeah, we can indoctrinate people. I have not said you cannot do that, and that's exactly what happened. You use Hitler and the Nazis as an example. That's exactly what happened. Why was the German people in general so supporting it? Well, because what they did is they would take the young kids out of their parents' homes, group them in what they call the Hitler Jugend. They got brainwashed there. They basically were raised by the Gestapo kind of people. They would brainwash their minds, focus them on doing what the Gestapo, what the Nazis would want them to do, and then they were sent into the field to execute it. So yeah, you can indoctrinate people, you can change people's minds. It's often done many, many times, but it doesn't make it right. It's still the wrong thing to do, so the moral law still stands, and that's why, on the end of the day, we all agree that the Nazis were evil.
We're still going round and round on this question of objective moral law. Again, I see zero evidence for objective moral law. What I do see, the examples that Rob raises are the obvious examples that I agree with. Is torture wrong, that sort of thing? Yeah, I got it. Is that objective? Would it be true that these are bad things if there were no people here? From my standpoint, I see no evidence of objective morality. What I see is shared morality. We're all the same species. We all have a common view of morality. Not all that surprising, a very natural explanation. If there is an objective morality, and we can reliably access it, my challenge to any Christian is take a vexing social issue, abortion, same-sex marriage, whatever, find the correct answer and let us know about it. Now, that we continue to have these difficult, contentious arguments says that either there is no objective moral law and we're just doing our clumsy, inept best, we're just people doing our best, or it exists but we can't access it. Either way, I see no value in the idea of objective moral law. And just a quick point on Stalin. Bad guy, I get it, and he was an atheist. Hitler was a vegetarian. Now, I'm not going to say, there you go. I mean, vegetarian, seriously? Hitler was a frickin' vegetarian. Come on. It doesn't work that way. What I need is cause and effect. Stalin was an atheist, and because of his atheism, that caused him to do bad things. Atheism is simply a rejection of a God belief. That's it.
All right. We'd like to thank both Bob and Rob for their participation.